I learned that you attended pretty interesting presentations today. So stakes are high. That's what I heard as well.
Absolutely.
For Brad. Yeah. Brad is not going to let you down. And that's for sure. Myself, I'm going to do my best. It's going to be, don't really know, but normally no more than 20 minutes. So I give you an update on the business side, and then I let most of the time for the technology gets in deeper. I would say as deep as you want, as deep as you need with Brian. Okay? So, here it is. So first things first, as Fred said, I guess that's a thing that most of you already know ourselves, but just a recap. We were founded already quite a number of years ago, late in 2009, headquartered in San Francisco. Nevertheless of that, more about half of our headcounts, and these days we are counting like 220, based out of Europe, many of them in France, in Paris, where we continue to have a big part of our development, of our engineering, as well as technical services. Even more importantly, on the right side of the screen, you can see here a snapshot on the large customers of ours. So they are in different vertical markets, they are across all regions. You see some names in here, starting by Europe, where we continue to have the biggest footprint, I would say. Names like Societe Generale, like Amadeus, like Orange. In the Americas, logos like Rackspace, HBO, for instance, SoftBank, KDDI in Japan. It is different vertical markets, more than 220 large customers as we speak, across all regions. Something that I guess that's you know already, we were named as leaders in the object-based platforms as well as distributed file systems by IDC and Gartner. IDC on the market space earlier this year. On the right side, you can see the Magic Quadrant for distributed file systems and object-based platforms late last year. So it should be a question of a few weeks for Gartner to issue.
Could be days.
Any of these days. And we believe.
You know that because you'll have filled out the paperwork that asked you to complete.
I might know that.
No. But we have big hopes that it's gonna continue to be Scality, one of the leaders. So, just right before talking about our solutions, what we believe that is making us unique, is making us different. First thing is not about the technology itself; it's about our experience, our track record, working and serving the very large customers. I would say that it's not that usual company of our size working on the multi-million dollars deals for critical projects in this type of customers. And we have the experience, we have the background. A half of the customers of those 220, either they are Fortune 500 or Global 2000 customers. The second one, yes, is about the technology. And we believe as well that we've been showing up already to the ecosystem, to our customers, to the market itself, that we are innovative type of company. Back in 2010, in the early days of the company, we decided to develop native connectors. So it was not only about objects at that time, but native connectors for file. We started investing in Senko before it was called Senko more than 2 years ago. Third thing, you know it better than what we do. You look at the market constantly. Different companies are taking different approaches, and I'm talking about the storage market and private, hybrid, and multi-cloud. We do believe that we are in the intersection of the on-premise storage and the hybrid and multi-cloud. I didn't do it.
AD?
I think I didn't. I can do it without slides.
There you go.
You did.
But it's much better with. Thank you. So yes, I did it. Sorry. So we believe that we are in that intersection, and we are covering both worlds: the on-prem storage with Ring and the multi-cloud data management with Senko. What we do? What about our solutions? First, as I was mentioning before, we are very much focused on a number of vertical markets where the big data is generated, and we can be in the core of their private or their public clouds. We're talking in here about service providers, media and entertainment, the big large enterprises, starting by big banks, and we count in all regions, and particularly in Europe, with a big number of big banks using our platform as core of their hybrid clouds. Government as well, very much focused and successful in everything that goes into defense and security. And at the end, every large enterprise that is investing in R&D is normally generating the big data, right? So manufacturing, cars manufacturers, life science, transportation, those are the vertical markets where we are very much focused. Providing with two solutions, as you heard already, as you know already. Scale out storage, that's the Ring, covering file and object-based workloads, as well as the multi-cloud data management. And I will go through it in a while with Senko. So all in all, and I hope you like the next 3 slides, all in all, we build the most powerful storage tools to protect, search, and manage the most critical assets, the most critical data of our customers, anytime, any scale, on any cloud. And these are the 2 products. These are the 2 solutions, in fact. So first one, Ring, scale out storage and structured data, purely software, really hardware agnostic. We run on any x86 server powered by Linux. Obviously, we have our alliances, we have our reference architectures, but we have the footprint with almost all hardware vendors. As I said, very much driven, and I will show up later, on co-working and being certified with leaders, ISVs, application partners in different use cases in those vertical markets. Either it is file-based or object-based workloads. And then Senko. Senko is a multi-cloud data manager, and we believe that it is the only multi-cloud data manager these days in the market that is independent of the storage. We can store data in native cloud formats, so it can be consumed by native cloud applications, regardless the storage, regardless the public cloud. And we also allow our customers to make global search of that data, regardless where the data is seated, where the data is stored, in the private cloud, in the public cloud. We think, and you have to tell us, that multi-cloud is becoming a reality. Hybrid it is. We see more and more large customers either going with different public clouds or at least planning to go with different public clouds. Even Amazon Web Services is saying that. Right?
Each cloud has a special.
If they say they have a single public cloud, I don't believe them.
No.
I would say it's not becoming a reality, it is a reality.
It is a reality. That's what we think.
So what's Senko, the name, what does it mean?
Good point. It's a Japanese word.
Japanese word.
Yeah, and it's a kind of holy wolf.
Yeah, celestial fox, we would say.
Yes, it's
Celestial fox with
it's a
celestial
superpowers.
It's a Japanese mythical fox.
Mythical fox,
Exactly.
right? That's superpowers.
Bit like
And wisdom.
Wisdom
like
and
that.
power.
Good question.
And we thought celestial clouds at all kind of, and the superpowers all fit together.
And somebody got paid for that, coming up with that name? Just saying.
I think it was
Nothing is free, dude.
voluntary.
Right. Yeah. Excellent.
So big importance to make our solutions easy to deploy, easy to use, easy to operate. So big step forward on the right side, and you will see more details with Brad, with the new supervisor, the new user interface of the latest version of Scality Ring 7.4. And on the right side, you can see in here Orbit. So the portal, the interface in the cloud for managing the multi-cloud data management. The most recent news, they came with Senko. So it's been open source and continues to be open source for a long time now. But we released the first version of Senko Enterprise Edition. That was September the 19th. It is Kubernetes based, so definitely it's a product that can be easily deployed on both on-prem and in the cloud. It's natively a cloud product, even if it can be installed on-prem. So this is not about traditional software, this is subscription based. Price per what we call TDM. So it's a subscription for the total data that can be managed by Senko. We are supporting more and more storage locations. Either it is private cloud, on-prem storage, besides the ring itself and the public clouds. You see in here, we are obviously working already with Amazon, with Google, with Azure, and some others like Wasabi, for instance. I said that before. This applies to both, and I would say that even more to Scality Ring. It is extremely important for us how we work, how we partner with those leaders in the different use cases. So these days we count with around 35 what we call application partners that are ready to deploy with Scality Ring. Meaning either they are certified or we have them in production already. Either it is in key use cases to us like backup, like archive, PACS for the health sector, video in content distribution, IPTV, video on demand, or collaboration, for instance. So it is applications, it is vendors that we are already working together. Backup, we are working with Commvault, Veeam, IBM, even with Network or VMC.
So when you do that, do you package those solutions together and support them together, or are you supporting the storage component and they're supporting their application? How do they manage that to give them that sort of like joined up seamless experience?
We support ours, but it is key for us both the technical side and then with a number of them the go-to-market. And the go-to-market includes how we support together the joint solution. But to your question, Chris, we support our piece, the storage. So we follow normally a testing protocol for the certification of both products with whatever protocols, either it is file or object, that we're going to work with. Give you the example of Veeam, for instance, for backup. We have a number of deployments based on NFS. They're launching the new version supporting S3. We restart the certification process. We build up reference architectures with the both solutions. We deliver some technical documentation for the delivery of our Scality Ring together with Veeam in that case. And then we go into the go-to-market piece. And the go-to-market is putting our teams together not only to sell the joint combined solution, but to support our joint customers.
And will the customer go to Veeam directly and then they will put that off to you afterwards if there was a problem?
In most of the
can Veeam deal with a lot of the problems? Do they not do that?
No, we don't do that. We don't do that. We co-work when there's a problem. We co-work even for defining and designing the solution, but we don't reach that level. This is an analysis made by Forrester with actual customers of ours. They interviewed the customers and they came up with these numbers. In average, 229% return of investment, being our solution paid back in no more than 6 months. So all in all, definitely we believe that we continue to be a very cost-effective with a very low TCO solution. Just to finish with, and it's been 17 minutes, this is what we do, and this is what we try and improve day by day, which is to help our customers to create value with their most critical assets, with their most critical data, either it is at the core of their private clouds or at the core of their hybrid or multi-clouds. If you have any question on the business side, go-to-market, positioning, more than happy to take it. Otherwise, now, yes, the stakes are high with Brad and the technology.
How do you continue to compete? Like the storage market's very diverse. You've got the big fat mamas, you know, EMC and NetApp sitting in the corner, doing nothing, being fat and lazy. And then over here we've got this vibrant set of startups, venture capital funded, desperate for market share, lean and hungry. Mm-hmm. How do you see that emerging? Do you see it emerging as a multi-sided market, or do the big fat mamas continue to take up all the space?
That's both an interesting and a difficult question.
Yes.
And it's difficult to give you a receipt, right? Yeah. If I had it, every single sales rep in my team would be succeeding. And sometimes we have someone that doesn't. Yeah. Seriously speaking, I think that it is obvious that they have an advantage with the installed base, right? The installed base that they are trying to replace with object-based platforms, right? That's the advantage what they day by day try and leverage on. Yeah. On our side, and I cannot talk about the rest, but I can talk about Scality. I think that we have two differentiators. One continues to be the technology. When we are competing with the vendors that you mentioned right now, we don't believe that any of them can afford different workloads, different use cases in the same platform with both file and object.
Right. They would sell one product for file and one product for object, and never the two shall meet. And then they sell a data management solution over the top.
Secondly, everybody selling software seems to be software defined, but then when you dig into it, most of them are selling appliances, meaning either you go with their own hardware or with a very closed architecture, or it's not going to fly. In our case, it's not like this. As I said in the beginning, we continue to be very much hardware agnostic, right? Yeah. So we have those technology advantages, we believe, and then it is our go-to-market and how we execute in. Right? Mm-hmm. And we have a company that, as I said in one of the first few slides, we believe that we have that experience working with the large accounts. And when we work with a large account, it is from the sales rep to the CEO, everybody involved, making that happen and making it successful. Yeah. So yes, they are the big guys, but we have our tools.
So I would say as well, though, that if you look at some of the historical stuff, even if you look at, say, where Pure sits today, they're looking at wanting 60-70% margins on the product. 65-ish, I think, is what Pure is at the moment. Mm-hmm. I have no idea what that equivalent is in the object market or in the software-defined market. Yeah. And I wonder whether that's an issue for people like EMC, where they look at other markets and go, well, this isn't going to have anywhere near the same margin, so why should we bother getting into it? Yeah, so they tend to put a product out, but not really spend a lot of time promoting and dealing with it.
The question I'm driving at, in part, is we're seeing technology markets were always first mover. There's always one winner. There's always one or two big winners, and then everybody else sort of dies off, and everybody's expecting a convergence. Mm-hmm. And in networking, we've got the same thing. We've got all of these startups, and in above the stack, we've got all of these other. I think we're actually moving away from markets where the big companies win. I think they become the big losers, and we'll have a lot of small players.
I don't think you can be a master of everything in the storage space.
And that's why I
get somebody focusing on the high performance side or the object side or whatever, the file side.
There's no one size fits all anymore. You actually want. So companies like Scality are useful because they fill gaps that the big companies can't.
Absolutely.
And never will.
I'll talk about this a little bit more, but I think Zinco is an interesting player in this space because it's somewhat malleable and it can morph, and we're seeing we're trying to keep our options open for now, but we're seeing customers, I think, more with Zinco than anything we've ever seen before, coming to us and saying, this is interesting, could I do this, could I do this, could I do this, and they're coming to us with their problems, and that's an interesting, we're pretty excited about that piece of it, and then trying to keep up with answering yes to those questions rather than is the challenge.
So I'll ask a leading question to start off then, Ben. You call it a data controller, but actually currently it's object. What about file? Because bearing in mind you talked about native file in your platform as being something you support. What about supporting file as an option?
Ask the question again in about half an hour if I haven't answered it. Okay.
Okay, fair enough.
So I won't spend a lot of time. I won't read all this to you, but some of the things that we see, I think we're convinced. We came into this market when object storage was young. S3 was pretty new as a protocol. It's been through a huge number of iterations. We do believe in object storage. We do believe that the predictions about unstructured data growing and becoming the most significant part of data are very true. We'll spare you the hockey stick curves, but we do believe that unstructured data is where most of the growth is going to be. And I think in some ways, saying I pity a pure is a funny thing to say, but it's just such a closed market of a very high I/O SAN kind of. I think we're excited to be in a market where a lot of interesting things are happening. We talked about the second one, just the fact that multi-cloud is out there. Some people say to us when they say Zinco, they say, okay, you're orchestrating data, but there's so much more to orchestrate when you're in a multi-cloud environment. And I think that's true, but I think from our perspective, the data is one of the hardest parts to orchestrate. You can move processing workloads from system to system much more quickly than you can move petabytes of data. And so we believe that the data management is going to become really important and remain difficult. Emilio also touched on this, the applications that are driving data, autonomous driving, many different kinds of applications. We definitely have seen manufacturing companies collecting huge amounts of data that they're working with, and we see the medical industry, obviously, but we're definitely seeing a lot of activity in this space. Whether you call that edge or not is maybe a semantic question. And another thing that we're working with and dealing with is this whole question of open source. We do believe there's going to be more and more open source in the future. We're seeing more and more open source just in the Fortune 500 is willing to adopt open source projects, open source technologies. Very interesting discussion if you go into a major bank and ask them what they think of Oracle. And there's almost anger. You see people frothing at the mouth about these things and willing to do things like Postgres that they wouldn't have thought about doing even 5 years ago. So I think that's very interesting. And it's pushing us to say, it would be a little pretentious to say we're going to be like Larry Ellison one day, but being hated like Larry Ellison is not part of our roadmap.
So which country will your yacht race for then? Yeah.
So anyway, I think it's an interesting point. I think open source offers some very interesting things. It gives assurance to companies, and it's kind of the world turned on its head, where companies say, "Oh, I can be confident. The technology is open source. It will be around in the future."
Yet, to be fair, all of it is based on a proprietary protocol. S3 is entirely proprietary.
It is indeed, and we could. It would be interesting to see where that goes. It is absolutely proprietary, and the IETF has nothing to say about it. And
This is interesting, as in maybe you live in interesting times.
yes, indeed, it is. It's not a happy interesting. It's
That's a furphy.
CDMI. We implemented CDMI. And we use it at the same time. It will never. Never replace.
Open standards happen in multiple ways. Sometimes it's a standards body, sometimes it's adoption. You could say that Oracle's database is pretty open by now because everybody uses it as a standard, right? Programming language that it uses in that SQL, right? But we've got to get past open is the only, an open standard is the only standard.
I've had people claim to me that the S3 is a standard, not open, but a standard.
It's an
Because
effective standard.
even AWS doesn't dare make too much change to it simply because it would screw too many things up.
Exactly. For all intents and purposes, it's an open API that anybody can copy.
They certainly don't seem bent on attacking people. They do copy it, but we'll talk a little bit about some things that we're doing that require extension of it, and that poses its own set of problems. And it is unfortunate that there is no standard body that you can submit a recommended extension to the protocol. So I think there's going to be quite a bit of fragmentation around the edges.
Take it to the ITF.
Yeah.
I can introduce you to people in the ITF who take it on.
Yeah.
Not hard.
That would be kind of fun, wouldn't
It's
it?
trivial.
Submit that to the ITF and see
We as a company have a long-standing relationship with the ITF because we used to do a lot of SMTP, and so we've been on standards bodies and things like that. I've done enough few hours on standards bodies to know that was not what my career was meant to be. If you've ever spent time on a standard bodies, I respect you highly.
Yes.
So the content, we're going to talk about some news, some things about Zenko, some things in the future. So Emilio spoke about this a little bit. I would say there's a lot of under the hood stuff that would be really too geeky to talk about, but most of it has to do with performance improvements, tweaking things to make the system go faster, and I'll talk a little bit more about performance. But the key thing that we've been working a lot on is improving the user experience, the UI of the system. And I'll go into something of a demo of what the 7.x version looks like of the product. And we're going to be releasing mid-November another step in the 7 that will be the main final LTS set of functionalities that will be in the 7.4.2 that will be coming out. But the UI, we'll talk a little bit more about it, but it's providing a very hierarchical interface to digging down into what's going on in the system, providing a much more friendly user experience across the product. We've also added quite a bit of work on the S3 protocol in particular. This was a bit of a challenge in early days of doing S3. Highly S3 compatible. We support the IAM, the Identity and Access Management features, very sophisticated set of features for IAM, which includes roles, all the delegated administration components of IAM. That was something that was highly requested by our customers, but we ran into a bit of a problem that we didn't know how to solve because the protocol was out there. We developed it. You can point AWS's tools for doing identity and access management straight at our APIs, and they work directly. But AWS has a portal that you can go to and do all of those things. And that's part of Amazon's infrastructure. So our customers said, well, where's the portal? And we said, well, that has nothing to do with the protocol. That's AWS's portal infrastructure. And it became a very difficult sell to sell to people. No, we don't have Amazon's portal. But we have the same API. So we've developed a console that lets you do the management of the functionality that you would find basically on AWS's website for our customers. You still have all the API access, but you have an interface as well. And to go along with that, and I'll be demonstrating this a little bit as well, we have an S3 browser. And again, an S3 browser, for years we said customers, it's what's an FTP browser? FTP browser, those things exist, or an NFS browser. Those things don't really exist. So it took some work convincing us, I think, but in the end, they're interfaces that help customers come to be friends with the technology. What we see is usually early on in the cycle of a customer's experience with the technology, they'll be using these interfaces, and then over time they really like the fact that they have API control of the whole universe. But this has been a large investment on our part, and I'll go ahead and do a demo of those things. So this is the S3 browser. You can't see it particularly well. I believe it will come out a little bit more clearly on the demo.
Perfect, lovely.
So,
I'm trying to make the slides.
so I think the best thing is I'll just jump into a demo of the UI, and you'll get a look.
Brad, while you're doing that, have you ever thought about doing either like a community edition or an edition where people can actually take the software and just install it themselves?
Of
Ring.
Ring. We've thought about it. We're not completely there. We wanted to do something like that, and that's one of the things we did with Zinco. It's much more complex with Ring. There's some history behind Ring with some technology that was no longer ours, that we couldn't, because we sold our company and then bought back some intellectual property.
Okay.
So we didn't have a right for some of that technology. We're probably moved beyond that today, but there's just a lot of things that we need to think about before
I
we
just
do
think
that.
if you look at other vendors in the market,
Yeah.
a lot of them will do that and give you the ability to just try it out,
Right.
or even giving you like a
Right.
10 terabyte license just to mess about with. And sometimes as an education step, to be allowed to understand the technology, or even just to get interested in
Right.
the technology, to want to come back to you, it can be a
Right.
positive message.
It's a very difficult. There's a number of elements that go into that. We did that with S3 because you can have the S3 server. You can install it as a Docker container. Up and running. We've had massive use of that. We run into companies all the time that are using our S3 connector as a tool for their S3 development. And that works out pretty nice for us because we have companies that have done that before they actually went to Amazon. And so it works better with Scality than it does with Amazon, which is, we've kind of stolen the protocol almost by having an open source. So there's merit to that approach. The file system interface, really to get interesting performance, you need a number of servers. I'll talk a little bit very shortly about what we're doing to make the entry point a little bit of a smaller step than the initial 6 server configuration. But let me do just a brief review of the technology here. I'll switch my screen around here to mirror it. So this is the user interface of Ring today. And I'll log into the system. That's a good start. So what we have is Scality Ring. I don't know if everybody is somewhat quite familiar with Scality's technology, some of you not much at all. What you see here is two Scality rings. I can talk a little bit more about the ring if that's of interest to people, but what we have is 6 servers across which the data is distributed and metadata is distributed. So we have 2 rings, dynamic distributed hash tables, if that's the basic idea. So we have a data ring, storing data on hard drives, and a metadata ring storing data on SSDs. And the metadata is used for file system structure, and it's used for S3 buckets, listings, and things of that nature. So what you have is the rings, how they're doing. Green's a happy color. The total capacity of how full it is. And some very simple information about how much of the capacity is available, how much of it's used, forecasting about when you're going to run out of space and when it would be appropriate to add more, and the number of objects stored in the ring. So very.
How well does this work if you're colourblind? Accessibility and all that?
There's only two colours on it, there's green and there's grey. I think you're probably fine.
So if it's good, it's grey. If it's bad, it's grey.
You want it flashing?
Oh yeah, okay, right.
So I can't. I guess I shouldn't say I'm unfortunately not colorblind, but unfortunately I can't answer that question. I know that it's an interesting question, but we could do other color schemes. But what you have here is the rings. This is, if you click on the ring, you get the same view for the metadata ring, and then sites and the different servers that are involved in the system. If I click on one of my storage servers, you can see I have some additional information I can dig down into my server. The kinds of components of the system that are running in the system. I have S3 components, I have storage components, and a very simple REST interface all running on the particular server. If you click on the disks, you can see that I have one SSD and four disks running on the system. And we've done quite a lot of work with the hardware manufacturers to include deep information. So this is running on a virtual machine, 8 core processors, the network interface cards, and we're going to be providing more and more detail of the underlying hardware that gives the OEM type vendors like HPE and Cisco a little bit of an advantage to have some deeper information here on that. And then a performance tab, which will show information about the load on that particular machine. So the day-to-day loads on the machine. So all of that very simple information. Then up at the top, I have additional information about services. So here's the information about, I have S3 running on the platform. It's been up 95% of the time, global health in the system. And this is an overall measure of the response codes that have been coming in on the S3 platform. You can see that the S3 service usage, how much inbound bandwidth, how much outbound bandwidth is available. I haven't done enough work, looks like that it's done anything there. And the performance of the system. Nothing's super active going on in the system. Some advanced monitoring tools. And then if you look on the file system interface, same kind of ideas. We have right now on the system, we only have performance information on the volumes. The version that's coming out in a few weeks will have that collection of tools for multiple volumes for the different kinds, additional information for the different kinds of interfaces. Then if you go over to the S3 interface, what you get is the S3 console. This is the IAM interface. I have an account called Fred, who's created a user called Sam, who's created data on the system. And you have things like user groups, policy management, key generation. I can have an active keys. You can generate new keys, and this looks very much like the AWS model. I generate a new key. And then the famous, you have the access key, you show your secret key, and then if you don't memorize those things, you'll never see it again. That's the basic approach there. So that all the same model as AWS has.
I always wonder how many people have screenshotted that and got that stored in totally unsecure, folders or on their phone or on all sorts of things, and it's just there's keys everywhere. That's
Digital equivalent of Post-it note.
Certainly. So
Stick it in your phone.
So one of AWS's answers to that question is this whole idea of roles. So you get credentials, only temporary credentials, federated identity management, things of that nature. AWS has some very elegant is maybe not the word, but sophisticated at the very least, solutions to those problems. And we are seeing a lot of customers being willing to adopt that model because they've adopted it for AWS, and that's one of the reasons we went, kind of did the full Monty and did the whole set of IAM functionalities. Because if it's very difficult if you've implemented those kinds of things with your security team with AWS, and then you have this platform, if you have to think a whole new model through. So if I go back over here to the browser interface, here I have my buckets. I have an Aston Martin button, a Ferrari bucket, and a Renault bucket, and I can create new buckets, but I can also browse in my buckets. You do have a built-in browser. This is really, from our perspective, the much more interesting piece on the system. And one really nice feature of this is we have all the user metrics associated. The user metrics are associated across the platform. This was a lot of requests for customers being able to have user metrics on the platform, just like AWS offers user metrics. So the total amount of storage that's been stored, the number of operations you've done, the bandwidth in and out, and the types of the operations that have been done.
Can you alert on any of that or restrict?
So we're introducing in the next version, the 7.4.2 version, quotas on space and things like that. That's something AWS does not support, but we're going to be adding that, and that's relatively frequently requested.
I was just thinking, if you've been hacked and some of those credentials have been exposed, you suddenly saw a huge amount of traffic outwards at that point. You might think there's something funny going on. You might want to restrict that account,
right.
Disable or something like that.
There's alerting across the platform, but not specifically on accounts. I think I don't have all the details of the quota management, but the quotas will certainly be volume-based and number of requests-based on a platform. So a user's account could get restricted on those things of that nature. But even if our customers are not using this publicly, inside their companies, they want to be able to limit usage of the system, as opposed to AWS is just as happy to have you
spend your money on that.
Set your credit card on fire. So that's the basic nature of the interface across the different tools. One of the key things that we'll be adding in the near future is let's see, 2 times the same screen. If I go back to the main interface. Oh wow. That's very strange. We'll just stop there on that one. Anyway, maybe someone's hacked my account. Probably not.
You should be so lucky.
Yes.
Okay.
So anyway, that's the basic model. The S3 browser, the S3 the console, and then all of the interface that allows you to simply manage the user. And the technology has enough complexity to it that we have a lot of really positive feedback about those elements of the system. So back to what's new. There we go. One of the things that's been quite highly requested and kind of comes back to your question, it's not completely open source, but it is a smaller model. We've developed configurations that will work for 3 servers. If you're not familiar with Scality, historically we've required a minimum of 6 servers for storage. When we first developed the technology, we imagined it for 10s or 20s or hundreds of servers, and not servers today where a single 4U server will have half a petabyte of storage. So we're looking at systems of 6 servers, or very often well over a petabyte of raw capacity. So we've developed a model that can have up to a petabyte of usable capacity on a 3-server configuration. So that gives customers, there's not as much redundance, not as much resiliency, but there's a much more interesting price point, entry point for customers starting out with the new platform. So this is something that's going to be sold through all of our partners, and we can sell directly as well, just based on a smaller set of servers. Because the typical entry point, I would say, for our customers is somewhere in the range of 500 terabytes to a petabyte. It's probably the typical sale of the technology. So that's another new thing. So those are the key new things about Ring 7. There's quite a few performance improvements, but the key thing is a lot of work on ease of use and a UI that's being continually improved. So every new release has some additional UI functionality that will come along with it. The Zinco, Emilio mentioned this already, but we now officially have the GA release of the Enterprise Edition Zinco 1.0. Just something of a review of what's really the core components of Zinco. The idea of Zinco is to be able to manage data movement between different environments, and go into some more detail on that. But kind of the 4 key pillars of the model is to keep the native data format of whatever target you have on the system, so that if data is pushed to a target platform, it can be used on that target platform as if Zinco hadn't put it there, if you like. Another key element is be able to have a single unified interface across all clouds, and notably that interface is S3, so pushing data into Zinco is done through an Amazon S3 interface, so a standard way of putting data into all the different kinds of models. Another tool in the system, and we'll talk more about this, is policy-based data management. The capability to lifecycle data, to transition data to other platforms, and to delete. Ooh, I did that button, didn't I?
Bottom left.
Screen blank button.
Oh, there it is. That's the kill button. So the policy management is going to have quite a bit of additional work, and I have some slides about that particular point. So if you go through some of the key features, an Amazon S3 API, it's the same API that we have in the open source tool. No change there. The storage locations that we support today, S3, Azure, Google, DigitalOcean, and Wasabi, and I'll go into some additional storage locations. The storage locations, like any system that's S3 quote unquote compatible, is a likely target. Some S3 implementations are quite limited, but competitive products like Ceph and MinIO work pretty much out of the box. The data mobility functionalities, we have one-to-one replication. So this is the same model is what AWS calls cross-region replication. We also have one-to-many replication, which is very interesting, pushing data from one cloud to many clouds. And then lifecycle exploration and lifecycle transition are two functionalities. So those are and again, those use the same model and rule sets that the AWS platform supports as well. And then for metadata management, you can do metadata searches based on characteristics of the object as well as tagging of the objects. And as Emilio mentioned, as of today, the system is being managed through a SaaS-based portal platform, and we're going to be developing on-premise capabilities for managing managing the system. What does a Zinco platform look like? Depends a little bit on your workload and how much data you have. But a basic Zinco on-premise platform will be 5 servers, kind of 1U servers that have a certain amount of SSD capability and fast Ethernet access. And that would be kind of in the 500 operations per second kind of range. So if we look at this kind of from up above, I don't know if this will be helpful, but the notion here is over time, we're going to have an ever increasing selection of sources and destinations for your data and platforms that the system can run on. We have a Kubernetes environment an open source Kubernetes environment we call Metal Kubernetes that allows you to install a Kubernetes cluster on premise. The system runs within a Kubernetes cluster. So you 5 servers on premise, you set up a Kubernetes cluster, deploy the system with it. You can deploy it on public clouds that have Kubernetes infrastructure, different Kubernetes environments. So the idea is to have just about any environment that you can think about that runs Kubernetes, you can run your Scality platform in it. So you can run the Zinco wherever it makes the most sense for your data path, if you like. Which is very interesting if you have a lot of data on one platform, you can run the Zinco next to it rather than having to have it on your own site. And then the sources, we talked about a lot of these already. Obviously, Scality's platform. The thing we're going to be adding, and I think is very interesting, is to be able to use legacy platforms like NAS platforms. If you have a big Isilon or an old NetApp that you have on site. And this is something we have quite a bit of requests for, being able to ingest the metadata from that platform. I'll show you a couple of screenshots of what that looks like into the Zinco platform. And then lifecycle that data, replicate that data, do whatever you would have done with it with an object platform, but within this model. So it makes a very interesting model to transition your business from a traditional NAS to an object-based infrastructure, or an on-premise NAS-based infrastructure to a cloud-based replication. So it can be used for migration, it can be used for slow transition. One of the things that people are looking at is actually, I have the next slide, it kind of shows this. You have maybe a Scality ring, maybe your own object platform, maybe a NAS. You can synchronize metadata only, or you can synchronize metadata and data into the Zinco environment and then push it to different environments. Those could be the public clouds, that could be another ring. So you can imagine taking a legacy NAS, but that button is going to kill me.
I know. You have to get somebody else to press it for me.
Yeah, I'll try it in my other hand. So you've got your legacy NAS, you ingest all the metadata, you have an object-looking view of your legacy storage system. Then you can use the tools for metadata search, work through the data, decide what you want to keep, lifecycle that into a Scality ring, into a public cloud, into 2 or 3 of those. And then when you've got all the data that you think you want out of your NAS, you can just shut it down. And if you decided that actually I don't want any of the data off my NAS, you never have to transfer any of the files from one to the other.
So just to touch on it slightly, Brad, sorry to go into a bit more detail, but when you look at the way that the platform works, you're exposing your own namespace as part of the Zenco platform. Is that the way you're currently running it? So for instance, if I'm an end user and I've got my stuff sitting on an object store that's running in my local data center, that's got a URL that tells me where that's located.
Right.
If I'm putting it into Zenco, I'm exposing the URL as being based on your running instance, your DNS name or whatever. That's correct, isn't it?
I guess I'm not quite getting the subtlety. Within Zinco, you have a view of the data, and in some ways that view is it's not completely obfuscated, but to the end user.
Yeah, but to achieve that, the exposed endpoint is Zenco. The
Right.
endpoint
Yeah, the
is
Zenko
Right,
server
right.
is
When
the API.
Zinco is the exploits
It's the
endpoint.
endpoint, yeah. So as you move stuff, then there's initially then that puts a scalability issue on how much data you can manage because it's going through that endpoint that you're supporting.
So
That's one question. But then if you're going to do that with NAS, that becomes a lot more complicated to achieve because people might have taken their data and placed it into all sorts of hierarchies based on a physical location that NAS is in, rather than an obfuscated namespace within
Right,
the NAS
right.
environment or something that's been built around some sort of sensible hierarchy. So how are you going to get around that as you move stuff in for people?
So there's a couple of things that we're looking at. One of them is you can just cross-map your data so that the hierarchy on the NAS looks exactly. You browse
Anything will change.
without making any changes whatsoever.
Well, the people will change to use the new endpoint.
And the people can change and use the new endpoint.
Right.
What we're including though is the capability we call out-of-band updates, which means one of the out-of-band update things would be to take the NAS, work through the data, replicate it into a view here, and then the people can keep using their NAS, and as data disappears, it disappears from the other. Now, it's obviously not a fully consistent view. But the idea is over time, the how to explain it, anything that happens on your local system, we want to keep, we feel like it's important to people that if they want to keep using their NAS, if they want to keep using their other object platform, they can do that. And we're going to update Zinco to reflect that information. Now, so what we call in-band means Zinco becomes the control point for everything, but we don't oblige people if they don't like that idea. So if they don't, all their data coming through Zinco, they can, for instance, use Zinco to find the data, and then they'll say, okay, now I know where it is on the NAS.
Yeah. But that's not so bad with object, because with object, you're storing an object in its entirety.
Right.
You're not usually you're not updating
Right,
it
right.
in any sort of partial way. So, and there's no locking involved in an object store.
Right.
So the last write survives in any of that scenario. So you could still replicate that across the Zenko environment where the last write still survives, even if people are writing to the individual object stores
Right.
independently, because whoever writes last, you just overwrite everybody else's.
Right,
code.
right.
But
That's the model.
But that's just not the same as NAS. because
Absolutely,
you just
absolutely,
can't,
absolutely.
you've got to put locking in there, you've got to look at partial file updates and all sorts of other things that go on. So I think the model is a lot more complex with NAS. And
Absolutely.
it sounds to me like you're not going to go the full thing. You're going in with a sort of partial implementation.
So yeah, I think the term I put there is taking your data on a journey. So the idea is you have a NAS that's no longer, you don't want it to be, you don't want to have an active, yeah, the NAS here in Zinco, that's not the model having it. Now, we've done quite a bit of work with trying to have the S3 model and the file system model kind of live at the same time, for many of those reasons, it just seems to be an intractable problem. Things as dumb as doing a move of a directory subtree, and the one represents renaming thousands of objects.
Yeah.
And S3, and by the way, renaming an object means copying it, so we can cheat, but the rat holes become very, very complicated. So the idea is more a model. Okay, you have a NAS, you want to transition it. This is a way of doing it. Now, one of the things that I'll talk about is we have some ways with our own technology, if it's our NAS, to make sure that those are very, very timely, the updates, because we.
So you're presenting the NAS as an S3 API, not drawing the NAS into the object store.
He's gonna kill me. I'm just going to put it down.
Yeah.
There we go. There's a button right there.
Yeah. You're not migrating the NAS into the object store. You're presenting the NAS with an S3.
With an S3 view of
an
the
S3
storage.
API.
So if you stop writing into the NAS and just use the Zinco API, then everything is very straightforward. If you're still writing into the NAS, that gets a little bit more complicated.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's eventually consistent, but it's.
Yeah.
So,
it's not an all-consuming solution, but it's a talk with us and we'll tell you what we can't do.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So the idea is your NAS, and the term Bloomberg used that I really like. It said hydrate a NAS. So the idea is you've got this old NAS that's full of.
You didn't do it.
I didn't do it this time.
We saw you not doing anything.
Okay. Well, we can. Okay, I'll just unplug that for now. And we'll see where we end up.
So I have another question about
Please.
metadata. So when you sync the metadata from the NAS,
It's not a normal
it's a one-way sync. Are you extending that metadata at all in your own namespace?
So that's, and I have a couple slides on that, but
Okay.
yeah, that's part of the idea. And one of the things that we want to do, and we think this is one of the really fascinating parts of it, this whole idea of having a workflow. And you can go wild with ideas about the ways that you can extend the data. Obviously, we have the Unix metadata that's relatively
Positive
modest,
stuff, right.
all the POSIX stuff. But you also have anything that's a video file, an image file, has got some wonderful metadata right in the file. So you have the dumb little command in Unix called file that tells you what kind of a file it is. So you can do a lot of tagging of data as you're pulling it out. You can also do the AI kinds of things. You know, this is a cat.
Sure,
This is a
right.
this is a car. This is an Austin Martin.
So are you doing this thing?
So we are today. What we provide will be provided. This is not the NAS piece is a January next year kind of thing, and I'll show you some screenshots
that's
of what that will look like. So all of the metadata that's built in will be there. One of the things that we're working on for this whole workflow engine, and I'll show you a slide about that, is the open source community. We're hoping that they'll provide plugins to do all kinds of things. We've plugged it into an open source environment that allows you to push an object onto their platform, and they'll send you back an image onto their platform, and they'll send you back any tags that they feel like the image represents. So things like that would be very straightforward to do. And there's a lot of things that could be very, very industry specific. It's in a sense filters, and I'll show you a little bit more about that. But that's the basic idea. So being able to take your data in a sense on a journey from okay, today you have a Scality platform. Tomorrow we want to work with the same data on AWS. 2 years from now, we're going to try the same thing on Azure. Or we have a legacy NAS that we want to retire over time, and we're moving the data into an object model. Now we can have a destination that's a NAS as well, if you want to push data into a NAS. But again, that would be, we don't want people actively reading and writing data on both NASs at the same time, with all the obvious things that causes. So, dare another demo here. So this is the Zinco. I saw somebody playing with it before, so let me disconnect my VPN. So what you have here is what we call a sandbox instance. The Zinco environment is running in the same public cloud as the Zinco Orbit administration platform is running. So it's just a toy instance. The open source code is available today to deploy Zinco on premise and then connect it into the Orbit environment. And then that's one of the options that's available to you. So Ken, stepping back a little bit, we talked about the ring, we talked about Zinco. From our perspective, Scality Ring remains one of the best platforms, if not the best platform, to think about doing an on-premise either file system or object-based cloud, or combined file system and object-based cloud. From the ability to make the promise internally that a lot of these public clouds are making. You deploy this infrastructure, your users use it. As the infrastructure grows, you just keep adding servers. Just to give you an idea, we have file systems that are running 20 petabyte range. I think one of this maybe a world record for an SMB file system, 20 petabytes of data. We have file systems with over 2 billion files in a single namespace. Object platforms, over 300 billion objects in an object platforms. Platforms running with over 300 servers. We have a number of customers, especially in the video space, that are seeing single stream on like an SMB 3.0 interaction of over a gigabyte a second on a connection. So some really nice throughput and having the ability to have a single file system that just grows. The customers really like that part of the system, and it very much fits this model of this is a service that users use. We just keep pouring more servers at the problem, and the same is true with the S3 interface. We have a number of data protection schemes, and we're seeing roughly half of our customers are either deploying on 2 or 3 sites. We have a very interesting 3-site model that allows you to have active 3-site model. You lose 1 of 3 sites, just transparently continues to operate. And a very flexible multi-tenancy between object and file system running. Many of our customers, I don't have the exact numbers, but probably roughly half of our customers are doing both file system and S3 object on the same platform. And we see a lot of them start with the file system interface as some of their ISV providers begin to develop S3 interfaces. They may transfer over. We have one of our customers, banking customer, that's been using TSM for a long time. TSM's S3 interface has improved greatly. So they're starting to look at using that one. Or Rubrik comes in. It's becoming a competitive challenge to the legacy vendors that they don't. Rubrik came into one of these customers and said, we have this S3 interface, we'll try that, that worked great. Now IBM was put under pressure to say, okay, where's your mature S3 interface?
So how's your relationship with Rubrik operate?
Just like Emilio said, generally speaking, we have closer relationship with some than with others. We're developing our relationship with Rubrik right now, but right now we have them in production.
They would provide the management tools.
They provide the management tools for their software. They actually gave us a compliment recently on our interface, and theirs is excellent. So that was a compliment. But so yeah, we tend to meet on a deployment. They deploy this. The first deployment we did, our ring was been in production for quite a while. They added Rubrik to the platform. Sometimes our customers tell us they're going to do it. Sometimes they don't. But
how do you erasure protect code over 3-site all active?
The scheme we use is we use a group of seven data parts and 5 erasure coding parts. Okay. When something is somewhat different from our technology from most of the others is the 7 data parts are actually original data, which means that there's a penalty-free read of the data, and we can read small portions of a file without having to reconstruct big boxcar files and things like that. So that provides us like a 1.8 overhead with excellent data protection. So less than 2 copies of the data. Obviously, with 2 sites, you can't invent data, so you have to have over 1 copy per site. But we feel like we have pretty much what's needed in this space. Flexible multi-tenancy, very good data protection, scalability that meets the expectations. So what we've decided to do is work out a marriage between the two, native object, native file, and now cloud native, if you like, to have both of those and help customers that have a private cloud work with public cloud, work with hybrid cloud, whichever those models make sense to them. One of the things that will be coming before the end of this year for S3 and early next year for file system is we have the tools that allow us to very, very quickly update the metadata in this out-of-band update approach to metadata, so that Scality's file system will certainly be a target. It will certainly be a place Cinco can operate. And again, you have the consistent S3 interface. As a matter of fact, it's the same S3 interface And over the next year, we'll be integrating all of the same IAM management tools so that you can manage Zinco. If you have a ring, you can manage Zinco together with your ring. If you have just Zinco, you can manage it independently. So the idea is to have, in a sense, the best of both worlds, the independence or the unified approach. So, a little bit more a vision. We talked about this already. Zinco for existing NAS data. I'll show you a couple screenshots. This might help. So, sorry that you didn't get to see the Zinco platform, but what you see on the Zinco platform is you configure storage locations. A storage location might be Azure. A storage location might be Google Cloud. It might be a Scality ring. It might just be a local file system. Now we're adding a new menu among the locations, which is a NAS. So that location can be where you put the data, or it can be where you take the data from. And you can see the notion. I can choose NFS. That's all that's planned in the initial release. SMB may very likely be added later on. The host name and the path that you want to export.
Which NFS version?
Good question. We're going to be introducing NFS v4 support into our product in the next version of the product. Likely NFS v3 at this point in time.
Just curious.
Just because there's the idea is any kind of a connection to another system like that is a very flexible kind of thing. So here's an example of what this looks like. This is a Mac screen with a NFS mounted volume. You can see the data in the volume, and then you have the exact same browser view in the S3, just a replica of the data. And the data can be replicated, or it can just be metadata transferred from one to the other. And partly in response to your question, here the metadata that we brought along, the group ID, the user ID, the time, and the checksums, and things like that. So all of that data can be brought over. And then we, among things that we can consider doing with workflow, there's a very rich set. So that's the file system and storage location. And in any storage location you have on your system, then you can add all the functionality. If you want to lifecycle your data somewhere else, if you want to replicate your data to one or many destinations. So if this becomes the source of the data, then you can lifecycle it or push it to multiple clouds. The other piece of work that we're doing is what we call the workflow engine. So on top of just policies that are life cycle, you can think of things like receiving traffic and replicating it, sending it to a particular destination or two destinations, filtering the data as it's coming in and not keeping all of it, sending some of it to your ManIO platform, another for cold archiving to another platform. Those kind of things. This is another example that would be you erasure code the data. We've been doing some work on some completely distributed erasure coding. So you break your data up into multiple erasure coded blocks, push them to 4 or 5 different clouds, and then you have this massively reliable storage of archived data, maybe that's of great importance. So those are some examples. Another example that I'd mention would be as you're bringing in data from a legacy NAS, you might be able to do things like rework the file directory structure of the file. They have filters that say, that file directory tree, I don't like it, so I would like to rewrite the data in a new format. Or we can any metadata that we can imagine pulling out of files. If you had media, you can do all kinds of media asset tagging associated with the file, or XF information, anything like that. You can extract it in a workflow like this. The idea then is to have a workflow engine that works across all kinds of different applications. So the notion will be a full graphic user interface. You can drag and drop tools to, for instance, an XF filter that will add tags for all of the things in the image. tagging in AWS is something really nice because unlike AWS headers, it doesn't require you to rewrite the object. And there's quite a collection. I believe there's 50 tags on the system that are allowed, and actually quite a bit of data space is available for the tagging. And then you can do queries on tags using our search tool. And that allows you to do very, very complex searches on the data.
So where would that functionality run, Greg?
That functionality will run in the place that's appropriate. So, for instance, you can imagine an AWS Lambda being kicked off by one of these. So as the data is being, if the data was stored in AWS, you'd run a Lambda on it before you pulled it into the Scality ring, or run a Lambda on it as you were pushing it. Google has tools like that. We could imagine some of the filters running in the Kubernetes cluster that the Zinco is running in, but ideally we'd like to leverage all of this rich Lambda kind of functionality.
So how about at the edge then? Could you do it on something like Snowball Edge where the data's been placed on something like that, run Lambda on it, and then push it back in somehow? So
that's the idea. Now the idea is that this is going to be an open source framework. We're actually going to have a design workshop at the next AWS in Las Vegas, and this is the information about it, an open design session. The idea is we want to build a framework that developers, we're going to be building tools, obviously, that you could drag and drop, but the goal in the end is to have a whole community of people that can come up with all kinds of things for their workflows. And then, can I do this, can I do that? The answer is, of course you can do that.
Is that feasible without donating the code to the community?
I'm sorry?
Is that feasible without donating the code to the community?
It's all open source already. So.
All of it? Okay.
So you could do edge stuff. You could
Absolutely.
wrap the edge process, do some
Absolutely.
processing, and use the technique to push stuff into a core location.
I'm actually doing a webinar on Friday with a company called NodeWeaver who sells edge devices. And they're running a tiny Zinco instance on their system that does that and then uses Zinco to push it into whichever cloud the SME has decided to push their data to.
So the difference between the open source and the
preferred the dark mode.
enterprise product is support and
That's
unlimited
right, yeah.
use of that orbit graphical.
God, you look like that.
At the risk of tangenting a little more than we usually do, how are you finding the split between who wants to take the open source community supported version and those who want the supported commercial version? The divide between those two groups, is it shifting? Are you seeing a shift one way or the other? I know it's all relatively new to you, but we're kind of at an inflection point in the market, aren't we?
Actually, I don't think so.
Right.
What we're seeing, SMEs having access to a technology like this and embedding it,
Yep.
it's wonderful for them that it's open source. What we're seeing in our major corporate customers is they're all in for the support and all of those things, but the fact that it's open source is, like I mentioned earlier, is something of a reassurance. Okay, even if the company blows up, the technology will still be there in the future.
Yep.
So I think that's the main view we have. I was talking to a bank relatively recently, and the question came up: aren't you risking diluting the value of your technology by having it open source? And the bank said, of course we want support. Of course we want anything that's enterprise and making it reliable. And that's the difference. The endpoints, the connectors, some of them, there's always going to be a larger collection of endpoints in the open source version than there would be in the enterprise version.